Columbus, Ohio, and I got Bill Kelly at his house, and I think he was having friends over for a barbecue. Bill and I got to be good friends before this whole thing was over, but he said, I'll be happy to talk to you. Call me at the office on Monday. Here's my number. And so I talked to him, and he introduced me over the phone later to a guy named Rick Roble, who was this young lawyer out of Harvard who was in Norfolk, Virginia. And he's the one of the big leaps they had was that a federal court does not have jurisdiction over anything beyond 3 miles past the low water tide. And this was out 200 miles, but in law school, Rick had written a thesis on the need for federal courts to take their jurisdiction farther out to sea, because someday before too long, there's going to be technology that could take us out that far. And there are going to be disputes over oil and minerals and fisheries and that sort of thing. And so he was the perfect candidate for this. Plus, he'd been a clerk with one of the federal judges in that same court, and so he was a good one to go to. And Rick ended up, I talked to him a few times, and he called me one day. I'm getting a long story here, getting around to answer your question, Kim, but he called me one day and he said, Tommy, who was the one who found the Central America, which is the rest of the story, is coming in a few days. Would you like to meet him? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And so this would have been in, I guess, July, probably mid-July of '87. And they were coming in for a big hearing because somebody was trying to drive Tommy off the site, literally push him with their ship off the site. And I didn't know what was going on out there at the time, but later it was very dramatic. Whole 1987 period when they were at sea. But Tommy came in. He was with Barry Schatz, who was one of his childhood friends who was helping him with this, and was a big asset in trying to find the Central America. And I met Tommy there and talked to Barry for a good while I was there. Tommy was in the courtroom, and that was closed to everybody but the parties. And so I met Barry and talked to him for quite a while, met Tommy. And Tommy said at the time, which confused me, that we really don't have time right now to accommodate a writer, which I didn't understand. We don't eat much. We just kind of stand around and ask some questions. But I found out later what he was going through, and he was about to lose his entire project after spending a large percentage of his life on it, because so many people were coming out there and trying to drive him off the site and challenging him and in court and this kind of stuff. So I just continued to stay in touch. I did some of my own research. I wrote a few letters to some people back in Columbus that were with Tommy's group, the Columbus America Discovery Group. And then the next fall, I got a call from Tommy and Barry, I think, and they said, we're ready to talk to you now. And I didn't know why they now were ready to talk to me, but I discovered later they had found the ship, and so they felt more comfortable with it, and the court had ruled that it would belong to them. And they were keeping all this very, very secret at that time. And so my editor and I flew to D.C. and met Tommy and Barry and Bob. Bob was the third in the group, who was extremely helpful in finding the Central America. Another very interesting character. And the five of us really hit it off. I was a little older than the rest of them, but we were roughly the same ages and very enthusiastic, and they had a great story, and I thought I could tell it, and I had a great editor who was very supportive at what's now called Grove Atlantic in New York. And so that's how I got into it. And then right after that meeting, this would have been January of '89, I guess, then I started making frequent trips to Columbus, and that summer and fall went out on the ship a couple times.
What do you think turned the preoccupation with Tommy Thompson for exploration and discovery? What transitioned the interest into him raising first $1.4 million and $12 million, and then developing new technology to go down and find the ship? I mean, he had to develop new technology to make this happen. That's a lot. This is what fascinated me about this whole project, is that the intent was to be able to locate this ship, but then he realized he needed all these other tools and technologies to facilitate it, otherwise it would never happen. So an entrepreneur or an inventor can start out to try to accomplish A, But in order to get A done, you find out you have to get all these other things done to accomplish that along the way. So all these other things get born, and this is one of the most exciting parts of it. Now, I know it's more complex because even after the ship was pulled up, how much gold was on that ship?
There were, you have to divide it into three different groups of treasure. There was the consigned commercial shipment. That was recorded, and it was approximately 3 tons of gold. There are estimates that there was as much gold on, in purses and carpet bags and money belts carried by the miners themselves. So that would have been 6 tons. And then there's always been I think, from what I know of talking to people who were involved in this project, although they never brought any of it up, they never found it. But I think that there was another 15 tons of gold that was an Army shipment. It was being transported by the U.S. Army. And at this time, I was saying there were a lot of reasons this was a tragedy. The people, obviously, but our economy at the time was very weak. The Crimean War had been going on for a few years, and all the farmlands in Central Europe, I guess, there were unproductive, and so they were buying wheat from the United States, and the only way they could get the wheat to the East Coast to ship it over was to put it on the railroads, and the banks financed the railroads. Well, when the war was over, there was no need for the wheat, so the railroads weren't necessary, and the banks were losing, and banks were folding, and it was a big, it was a huge, problem with our economy. They called it the great, I forget what it was, recession, something or other, of 1856, 57, 58. And so this gold was expected back east to help shore up the banks. And when that didn't arrive, that also, some people think that led to that was the final straw that caused the banks to collapse, and that led to the Civil War, because the North was perceived as being weak, and the Southern economy was strong, and that's when they decided to secede, and that this was a fairly big factor in that. Did I answer your question? I sometimes can get talking.
No, that's okay. Let me ask you another thing. There's a online magazine called Outside Online, and you wrote an article called The $1 Billion Boat. Was it a $1 billion boat?
Didn't write that.
Well, they did.
Yeah.
It says, in June 1998, Outside Magazine's called The $1 Billion Boat. Now, maybe they named it. It says by Gary Kinder. See, people can write things and use your name.
Well, how about that?
Well,
1998. Well, the book came out in May of 1998, so maybe was it a book review?
It looks like it. It looks like an article by you. They say by Gary Kinder.
Wow.
Something to check into.
Yeah, no kidding. I haven't been paid for that one.
All right, well, let's go back to Tommy Thompson. I totally understand why a venture like this would need to be under the radar to get it done, and to only involve people that were going to be part of and integral to its accomplishment. I get that. And I totally understand the fallout of parasites coming from the outside who didn't do anything to try to claim the discovery. And this is not necessarily in your book, but there is complications after it's all said and done. Tommy Thompson has seemingly disappeared. Nobody can reach him, talk to him, etc. Christie's had a very difficult and unhappy experience with him financially, and others. What happened to the original investors? Do you know?
What happened? Well, there were a bunch of them, and it kind of grew because they invested in 1985. So Tommy ended up going out just to do the search in 1986. That's what they call mow the lawn. That's just going back and forth with this brand new prototype sonar. But the investors, there were several dozen of them, and then some of those had kids, and they put some of their investment in the Central America project. They gave them to 4 kids, and before you knew it, they had 150 to 200 investors, I think, in this. send, you can